usually see that younger partner being labeled as a gold digger because it's not assumed that an older woman is going to have wealth to go after. And if you do like see a dynamic where it looks like an older woman is taking advantage of a partner's like youth and wellness and beauty, it's like cheered on as opposed to being denigrated. And it's weird. Like, what I think that part of it comes probably directly from American Pie, honestly, where you're like, you're like cheering on the young guy for getting it on with an older woman. Like, wow, what a notch on your bedpost. That's so cool, man. But there's not actually a feeling of real victimization going on, but you tend to see that as like the primary concern that we have for an older man taking advantage of a younger person. It's very bizarre. And I think that that's part of the idea that older women are like inherently ineffectual, like kind of helpless and kind of not to be taken seriously, whereas older men are scary and possibly creepy and possibly trying to hurt you. And not that I want older women to be scary and creepy and possibly trying to hurt you, but there's definitely a power difference there in the way that we see people of different genders when they're older. But I did find some really interesting research on cougars, actually, like specifically, I think it was like the title of the paper is called like the cougar phenomenon or something, where in 2015, these researchers used data from a national survey of family growth about relationship types, and they were looking for cougar dynamics. They found that roughly 13% of sexually active women between the ages of 35 and 44 had slept with a man who was at least 5 years younger. So that's kind of that was kind of their definition for a cougar dynamic. And I'm kind of thinking, so if you're 44 and you're sleeping with a man who's 39, you're a cougar now? Like,
wow.
I don't agree with that, but I'm just going to keep reading this little quote that I have here. Contrary to conventional assumptions, a majority of these relationships were not flings. They lasted at least 2 years, and a sizable share of the cougars, quote unquote, are married to their younger partners. So whereas like a lot of the time we're taught to see these women as like being predatory and moving from man to man and, just like wrecking them for other women after that, they actually tend to be like committed relationships with nice ladies.
Totally. The term cougar itself implies that they are preying on someone.
Right. And I'm going to bring it back to porn for a minute, because I think that there's a dynamic there that is really important, that is really reflected in that sort of predatory nomenclature, right? So the main thing I think that, well, there's probably two things that a lot of people like about cougar porn and MILF porn. The first being that the women's bodies in MILF porn are more developed looking. Like literally I wrote an article a few years ago for glamour.com, specifically about ageism in porn. And we were talking about MILFs a lot. And Caden Cross, who is a longtime performer and now like a very big deal director in the adult industry, was telling me that basically it's your look more than how old you are that categorizes you as a MILF or not a MILF at this point, because having big boobs, usually fake boobs, makes you a MILF. So she said, quote, "Fake boobs make you a MILF, especially now. In the past, everyone had them, but now they've gone out of style, which actually helps in terms of hitting the market you're looking for. Because a lot of performers who have fake boobs have them from back when it was popular to have them. So if you have fake boobs at this point, you're basically already in the like demographic because you're older. And so basically like one thing that draws people to the MILF category is that they like women with bigger boobs and more developed looking bodies, which is legit and awesome. And the other thing that a lot of people are drawn to if they're into MILF porn is that in most MILF porn, and I would argue in Hollywood and in the real world too, the dynamic between the older woman and her partner is very different, because in MILF porn, etc., the older woman has more agency. She is more often the initiator of sex, She knows what she wants, she knows what she likes, and she takes a much more active and aggressive role. So if you are a person who is looking for a female person to take control and like tell you what to do without getting into, like kink dynamics, a MILF is much more likely to fulfill that role for you. So I think that's really important, because it touches on a lot of things that we've mentioned already, which is that a lot of women tend to be more comfortable with themselves and more comfortable with who they are as they get older. And we see that reflected in porn. But also it provides the mirror of what we're kind of taught to expect and to think is sexy from women, which is that they are young and therefore attractive because they're young, and that they play a more passive and receptive role. And if you actually look at the numbers on porn websites, it looks like there's possibly more people out there who are into more active, more aggressive, and more dominant women. Just saying. I think that's cool.
I think that's cool too. But I told you earlier that I was reading like Life Stages and Native Women by Kim Anderson.
Yeah.
And there was an actual chapter on elders that really I wanted to kind of close out what I have to say about it.
Yeah, cool.
Elders perform in this book, she talks specifically about Cree and Anishinaabe people. And she was talking about how their elders perform both male and female duties in the Anishinaabe culture. And that was incredibly interesting to me because that means that gender was never static in tribal communities, but fluid with age and fluid from person to person. And then that was kind of backed up by this other article that I read in this book, Critically Sovereign, about Hawaiian people and how their relationships and their genders were fluid, and how people who wanted to really fit in with the Western European society started to change the culture so that it would kind of look a lot like theirs in order to stay alive. This was an actual life and death situation, but it was rooted so deeply in culture that it's hard to pull back out of it, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not a matter of when we're talking about decolonizing something, we're not looking at looking back and redoing something through nostalgia, but we're looking at the undoing of something that should have never been done in the first place.
Yeah. And imagining a way to be without those structures and systems.
Right, exactly. In addition to that, Kim Anderson said that elders were given more responsibility, especially responsibility to the kids. They were supposed to give names, tribal, indigenous names to the kids. And the more names that they would get, the older that they would live. And so there was a connection to the elders and the life cycle. The young people would be directly interacting with old people every single day of their lives. And so then today, we see elders disappear at a certain point in our society, whether that be from erasure on TV, because we start seeing elders less and less in the regular TV that we watch.
Right.
Whether that's because our actual elders went to old folks' home or moved to Florida to a retirement community. And that leaves a gap in the visual life cycle of youth.
Absolutely.
And so to me, that was a connection to when you can't see where your life is going, when at 65, or even for children of color, American Indian children, we see people starting to disappear at a much earlier age, 45, 50.
Yeah.
It's really hard to imagine what your life is going to be like in the end years. And so it's when you don't know how that's going to look, how can you expect kids not to commit suicide? I mean,
Right.
it's part of the life cycle that needs to be, it's part of the visual life cycle that youth need to be seeing so that they can
Yeah.
see what being old is like, and not in a way that is like negative.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a
Um,
really, really important point.
yeah. So, and that's not to say that ageism never existed in tribal societies. Like clearly human beings are capable of it, and therefore it's possible to have
Right.
been done by anyone in the world. But I think it's really important to make sure that we're putting a type of old person out there that's real,
Mm-hmm.
three-dimensional, and in a way that, you know, our kids aren't thinking that once they turn a certain age, they're no longer going to be, you know, beautiful and
Valid.
sexually active and
Yeah.
valid. And that's what it comes down to. The rules are made up, and let's try and fix it all.
Yeah.
Let's make everybody valid. The rules are made up, and let's make everyone valid. Like that's the point of
Ooh,
our entire series.
yeah, I like it. We'll just start putting that on like all of our shirts and everything. Yeah. No, I mean, it's so
Yeah.
true. Like, I think about like times in my life that I have heard people say, like, whether in person or in movies, like you're like going around a circle and you're saying, like, what's your biggest fear? And somebody will almost inevitably say old people. Have you ever like experienced that? And like I always used to see it as like, okay, well, clearly that person is afraid of death, and so seeing someone who's closer to death than they are is terrifying to them. That makes sense. But I think that what you just said is like a really important part of that. Like in so much of our modern culture, for a variety of reasons, young people have been removed from older people, like physically removed from them. Like when I was growing
Mm-hmm.
up, we would go to see my older relatives wherever they lived, or they would come to our house or whatever, but they were not just like, they were not around. Like I couldn't just access my grandparents or my great aunts and uncles or anything when I wanted to. They
Yeah.
lived away from us. And it really creates like a gap between like our formative years, like when I was a kid and I was sort of forming my mental map of what life looks like and what I will look like at different parts of my life. I didn't have the access to older people. And like what you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
where, in native populations, like those old people literally almost don't exist, because the life expectancy is much lower. And then when you look at, media, and there's like so little representation of older people, there is this, it's like there's just an absence where there should be like a robust population of people who are not just older, but are like, repositories of lived experience that we could be
Right.
learning from and treating really seriously. And we just don't have that much access to it. And we're sort of like conditioned not to take the people that are in our lives or that are represented seriously as like vital
Mm-hmm.
living beings. And it does make that idea of aging and of old people scary, because it is an unknown. And
Yeah.
like, how could I become that? And then, you always hear the totally overplayed line in movies and stuff of the old person looking in the mirror and being like, when did I get so old? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, like you just blank out, and then one day you wake up and you're old, and oh God, your life is over. Like,
Yeah. Like I
not,
woke up this morning with a hunch, and
yeah,
when it just like happens when you turn that age, apparently. I
yeah.
don't know. Yeah, I mean, all of that's true. Should we talk about our moms now? No, I'm just kidding. Let's not do that.
Yeah, let's tell everybody all about our moms. But as far as it goes, my mom has given me a really good example of getting older, because she is like extremely active and
Yes.
badass. So good job, Mom.
My mom was literally sledding down hills in like the way secluded mountains, like just yesterday.